nothing's as it seems. Giants walking, angels and demons fight. Only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold. Mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold. From valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to Myth, Mysteries and Majesty. Study with us and don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy and horror. From Dungeons and Dragons to Skyrim and Mordor. From powers haunting evening, in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Mysteries and Majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
Blessed Lord's Day. Today's Easter according to the Eastern Orthodox calendar. So happy Easter to all of you who are celebrating this huge holiday today. I hope you're spending time with your family in the church and also with us tonight. When it comes to tonight's topic, I've been thinking about this. I even bought a book that we'll be discussing tonight by Eric Kurlander, and it's called Hitler's Monsters. And it's a really good book. It's a really thick book with small letters, small font letters. So it'll take you a while to read, but I would suggest don't rush, read slowly. So we'll be dissecting the first third of the book. This will be we'll probably do sequels in the future because the book we wouldn't do a justice if we would cover everything or try to cover everything within 2 hours. But I was specifically interested in this topic, and Pastor Ben helped me pick this topic because in order to understand something so wicked and evil, such as Nazi Germany, and it wasn't just Hitler. Hitler came actually very late. We want to see what was, just like with the Bible, what is the context before something happens? What is the historical, cultural, spiritual context behind the story? What was paving the way even before Hitler came? What was there that was tickling the mind of the whole German population and nation back in the late 19th century that they were like open when Hitler came to the scene to what he had to say? So again, the book is phenomenal. The topic is very vague, mysterious, fringe, but that's why we love it. And again, this book, because it also deals with spiritual warfare, we as Christians want to dissect in order to better understand how spiritual forces work. But before we start diving into that, Pastor Ben, it's been a minute. I'm really pleased that you found time in your busy schedule to come back on the podcast. I really enjoy any episode I do with you. I'm always chilled. I'm always enjoying. I'm always learning from you. You have read so many things in your life that I'm like, man, we should make a podcast. Man, we should make a podcast. Like, we have so many similar interests when it comes to novels, books, TV shows, comics. I'm like, man, like I feel we can do a podcast easily, weekly. So again, welcome back on the podcast. Can you please reintroduce yourself to the audience who maybe forgot you and those who are new to the channel?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Ben Cunningham. I've been a pastor for, over 20 years now. Husband, I've got a wife, 4 kiddos. I came to Christianity out of paganism and worshiping, earth religions and New Age and that kind of stuff, which is a lot of the reason why I found this book so interesting that we're talking about today, when it got into, some of the Norse stuff and runes and different things. I was like I had no idea that that had anything to do, or at least so much to do with Nazis and Hitler. So yeah, I came out of that. I've lived, I would say, a fairly supernatural life before I became a Christian at 21 years old. Saw and participated in a lot of dark things, and then after becoming a Christian, I've seen a lot of amazing and miraculous things. So yeah, I'm excited to be here. I think it's been something close to a year, or maybe a year, that since I've been on last time. So I am happy to be here and looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that background and a short bio. Pastor Ben, I want to also ask you before we start diving into the book's material. Is it just me, or this book is a combo of people who think, oh, this is boring because it's politics? It mentions politics, but politics is not the most prevalent thing. It thinks about the occult, it thinks about the supernatural, it thinks about like Nordic mythology, this Indian ancient religions influences. It talks about astrology, it talks about horoscopes, it talks about runes, like you said. It talks about, even mentions some Nordic gods. It talks about mass hallucination and influencing public through your speech by almost putting them in a trance, but first having ability to receive whatever you need to receive from cosmic powers. And we'll discuss what those cosmic powers could be. So when I read this book, I'm like, I don't know. It's a book about everything. Yes, politics, but also so many supernatural aspects. Like when you read it, I'm like, especially with chapter 3, like I told you before we went live, I was like amazed, because at least in my case, I was ignorant about so many aspects of the World War I and World War II. What was causing Nazi Germany to become racist? But what was the worldview that would pave the way and say, hey, we are supreme, we're better? But it's not just out of blue. They thought they had reasons to believe in this. So when you were reading this book, what were your impressions? Were you like wowed, just in the same way as I was like, wow, there's so many things I didn't know? And yes, Hitler and people who came before him, they're deeply involved into the occult. That's why their occultic beliefs influence politics. It wasn't vice versa. And through politics, because politics unfortunately brings power, they were able to hypnotize the masses.
Yeah. So I thought it was really interesting because, like you said, I was expecting more of a dry book. And while it does mention a lot of the different political parties that were alive and active, at the time in Germany, and it just amazes me how many, like little political parties, there could be, all kind of operating in the same realm. More than that, it really expresses, and I think the author mentions this several times, like the feel for the everyday citizen who either, starting in like Austria and Vienna, and then later in Germany, when they were at the coffee shops, when they're hanging out with their friends, what are they talking about? What are they interested in? What are they, dabbling with? And how this book really frames that as the cultural norm for the society at the time, and how it was so focused on, parapsychology and astrology and just everything, that is considered occultic. And how so much of it got its roots from Kabbalah, which is like Jewish mysticism, or like Hinduism, and, from India. And yet what was done with it, to reframe it and focus it in on, kind of creating the idea of an Aryan super race. And a lot of these philosophies and ideas, and I think they call it border science, in the book, about, like moons hitting the earth and glacial years, all these kind of things that they're talking about, I've never once heard of. Never. As an American in school, you study World War II, and it's just, Germans bad, Nazis bad, Hitler bad, it's, England and United States good, and that's it. So this was very eye-opening.
Yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, let's start diving into some of the content of the book. So we'll start with chapter 1. And it's a very interesting story. I'll skip some of the content for the sake of time. It says, one day in August 1909, a young man dropped by the Vienna, and Hitler was an Austrian, by the Vienna office of the Austrian occultist Jörg Lanz von Liebenfels, I think. And he asked whether he might order some back copies of Lanz's self-published periodical Ostara. Lanz was Central Europe's most ardent proposal of Aryasophy, an esoteric doctrine that prophesied the resurgence of a lost Aryan civilization peopled by Nordic god-men. The visitor, of course, was Adolf Hitler. And later, Eric says that it is not known if Hitler ever indulged himself with this periodical Ostara, if he was really reading the content. But as Eric says, it will make sense if he did, because why would he stop by and ask for his copies of the magazine and not being influenced by it at all? So this was in 1909. And what is also interesting is that in pursuing any issue of Ostara, the future Führer, so Hitler, would have come across multiple themes that found their way a decade later into the program of the Nazi Party. Some of them are the importance of Nordic blood purity and the dangers of racial misgeneration. Then, of course, the monstrous, views of the Jews, because they did see them as someone below, as they also did see my own people, the Slavic people, and they also saw Africans as people who were like less evolved. Then they saw the dangers of socialism, liberalism, and feminism. And finally, the mystical power of the Indo-European swastika. Pastor Ben, for people who may think that swastika is predominantly and or only a Nazi German symbol, like I used to think when I was a kid and I was a teenager, you watch movies, but you don't know the history, you're too young. And then later on in life, you're like, oh, so it's an ancient symbol that other civilizations use, and it's an occult symbol. What do you think would be interesting to share with the audience? It can be one sentence or 5, it doesn't matter, when it comes to this ancient symbol. What is it that is so interesting that, in your understanding, Nazi Germany used this symbol and said, we're going to claim it because it speaks about us and our people?
Yeah. So it is a type of rune, going back, into Norse mythology. What's very interesting, and it isn't covered in this book, but that very same image is found in Native American art and symbols, from way back before any of this. And it is intended to look like the sun. It's supposed to look like the sun rising, on the great, what they had kind of purposed it for was the sun rising on the great Aryan race and nation and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I was raised only associating it with Nazis and a symbol of evil and of hatred and, like skinheads. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, there's, a lot of talk about neo-Nazism and skinheads and, how the hate has perpetuated, throughout the generations. And so, yeah, the swastika was always really viewed as something bad and evil. But to know that they were trying to purpose it as something almost positive, and not have it associated with genocide and evil and death that we know it as, was kind of interesting to see it, more from their perspective.
Yeah, thank you for that. As I was checking, so swastika symbol goes across many continents, and it goes back up to 7,000 years ago. So we can say up to when people became more advanced. So when they were like, this is between, I wouldn't know because different archaeologists would say different dates. So I am no authority on this field at all. But let's say about approximately. So this reminds me of something like after the last ice age, and when people start spreading out from the Middle East. So this will be after the times of Cain and Abel's descendants and people like that, and when they start building first cities, this symbol, an occultic symbol, starts showing up in Eurasia, so in two continents as well as in Africa after that. So I'm like, okay, so this is happening probably before the Tower of Babel. And it originates when people decided to be independent of God, build their own cities, and disperse throughout the planet. And this happens when when you decide to just not have to deal with God anymore, because then you invent your own symbols, your own religion, and your own gods. And that's interesting because here on the same page says that there are some stuff that were involved, that were part of the Nazi Germany and the whole program. And these things and these so-called sciences can be divided in three different subcultures. The first is Aryo-Germanic religion, folklore, and mythology. The second is everything about the occult, including the esoteric doctrines of theosophy, anthroposophy, I don't know how to pronounce this, and Ariosophy. And third and finally, we have the so-called border sciences, ranging from astrology, parapsychology, and something called dowsing to world eyes theory. So let's talk a little bit about the first thing that involved Nazi Germany, the first of these subcultures that has to deal with Aryo-Germanic religion, folklore, and Nordic mythology. I don't know about you, but I was surprised to see how Nordic religion and Nazis made connection with that, because they're like, oh, based on Eurasian old mythology and of this ancient race that was like so supreme, survived through everything, and all these blondish people that came to Iceland and Scandinavia and Germany, these are our descendants. We're coming from them. We were like more evolved. We're like supreme. We're like almost the perfect epitome of a human being. I'm paraphrasing, right? And they start getting involved in not just Nazi politicians, because the Nazi Germany of Hitler's time still didn't exist. But this was, like we said, slowly paving the way to that. Because then people start seeing like blonde people, Caucasian people are good. But all these monsters, all these devolved people or other races who are not evolved as us, they're beneath us. Slavic people, Africans, Mongolians, Jews, they're all beneath us. And then they start thinking about Nordic gods, small g gods, of course, as Christians. We don't give them that much of respect. And they go even saying how there's so many aspects that paved the way. One of them was, and you and I both love novels and fantasy stories and epic stories. And they even mention Brothers Grimm and other, German folk horror and fantasy authors who like write all these stories, hundreds of stories, where like, Germans are the heroes who are like almost like knights coming to save the day in the novels. But all these monsters like werewolves, vampires, all of this, they can be in a way like compared to the Jews and to the others who are like beneath us. So they were slowly programming the whole German population through these novels, through these stories, like we're the good guys, these are the bad guys. What is there when it comes to this first subculture that slowly influenced a Nazi party when it comes to this Aryan Germanic religion, folklore, and Nordic mythology that you would like to mention?
So I had to, Google, like I mentioned to you, one, I had to Google how to say a lot of this stuff. And two, I had to Google where exactly some of these places were on a map and where was the overlap. Because it was mind-boggling to me that Germany was basing a lot of this off of Norse religion, which, I'm thinking of Vikings, right? And so I had to, really try and figure out, that, when this country's up here and this country's down here, well, there was a little bit of overlap in the middle where some of, the folklore, it constantly uses the German term, the Volkisch, which means, folk, like folk medicine, folk science, folklore, throughout the book. And it's talking about these things and how there was kind of some overlap for it to travel down. And I thought it was amazing reading about, like, the Brothers Grimm, about like Flight of the Valkyries, and that 3-part movement, the orchestral pieces, and how all of that was working together to try and write, as in like create, like WRITE, write a mythos, I guess, or a creation type story for the Aryo-Germanic people. They didn't feel like they had anything outside of Catholicism really to say, where did they come from? And they were trying to, in a way, create their own identity by creating their own religion. And it reminded me, one, of Tolkien, right? And how he was involved in the wars, and how while he was there, I don't know, I guess the contrast in between what this country was trying to do as a German people versus how, Tolkien was kind of looking at it and saying kind of the same thing, but how from a Christian perspective, you get these amazing writings and these novels and stuff where he's creating, languages and then putting culture and world building around it, versus, a country of people in the late, 1700s, all throughout the 1800s and into the early 1900s that are, trying desperately to invent for themselves who they were and who they came from, to try and justify who they're currently being today. And the more I read on this kind of stuff, and this milieu of, occultic and pagan influence on what was going on, the more I read it, and I'm going to be honest, and I'll probably get some hate for this, the more I kept thinking, wow, this sounds like America today. It sounds like kind of the same boat that we're in and have been in, for the last, I don't know, several decades anyway. And so it's been kind of eye-opening for me to read what the culture was like at the time, and kind of compare and contrast it to my personal experience and what I see going on in the news and other countries in the world around us today.
Yeah, I was also occasionally making political parallels with the world today. And I'm thinking, as I was reading, oh, this would be good to learn for any political party, Christian or not, whoever you're voting for, and whatever the amount of importance politics takes in your life. Just don't be too extreme, because extremists, they, on both sides, they can do very dangerous things. And we can see in this book, when politics was mixed with the occult, with myths, with fairy tales, and how they were programming Germans for decades. When Hitler came, they were like, already, yeah, he's our Messiah. Bring him on. We're already ready. We already believe what he believes. He just needed to like encourage us to start, making a bigger move. And I'm like, it didn't happen in a vacuum. And it's also interesting because on page 9, because of this influence in Indo-Aryanism, Germans started questioning their classical Judeo-Christian foundations and their beliefs and the Bible, including the Roman Catholic Church and these our virtues of Western world and Western society, because for them, they're like, it's not good enough anymore. And that reminds me, sometimes when I check commentaries or opinions of atheists online, about Hitler, they're like, oh, well, he was a Christian Catholic, so thus Christians are the main cause, and religion is the main cause of wars in world history. But when you check, you don't have to read anything else about Hitler except this book. You would see that he was everything but a faithful, devoted Catholic. He was
Yeah.
everything but a Christian. He was not acting as a Christian at all. So again, here comes the political climate, even before Hitler, where all these things are slowly influencing Western civilization, including Germany. And people are like, we're not satisfied with the Bible anymore. Give us Nordic gods, give us myths, give us this, Indo-Aryan, stories and myths and tales. Give us Hinduism, give us even Islam. They're like more open to it. Give us something about it. So through their study of Indian civilization and religion, German Indologists found evidence for an essential idea of Aryan culture and spirituality. And then they were comparing this, Nordic, famous mythological writings as well as Indian, and they would compare this with Christian stuff and pre-Christian culture and Germanic civilization, and they were trying to find this to connect the dots because, as you would just said 5 minutes ago, it had to deal with their identity. So I think that the German, population, civilization, especially after losing the World War I, they were kind of feeling a little bit like maybe losing their identity. But even before that, when you're dealing with lacking identity, and when I say you, it can be a group of people, it can be individual. And if you don't find your identity in God, you'll come up and invent a lot of things. You will exaggerate things from the past, just like, I don't know, Hebrew cults. They will invent that they're the lost tribes of the Hebrews from the Old Testament. They're the ones who were held in as slaves. They're the ones who did these things happen to them. They're the people to who God spoke, and this is not true. But this, I think, happens with lacking your identity. If it's not rooted in God, then you'll just invent anything for the sake of filling that gap that is in your heart. So would you agree that as a pastor that there is a danger if we don't know who we are, we can just turn to any side except God, and that can be like another push in our downfall, not just as individual person, but as a nation as well?
Absolutely. I find more freedom from bondage in my personal life the more I understand who I am in Christ. And I think some of that comes through historical context, understanding, who were my parents, who were my grandparents, what cultures did they come from? Some of it comes from knowing, as a country, how we were formed and, how we were created and how did we get to where we are today, and not just the stuff they teach you in public education, because they really, really, really whitewash a lot of the history that they teach us. So a lot of it comes through that. And then as a Christian, so much of it comes through, getting a deeper understanding of the scriptures, of, like you said, reading commentaries, reading and learning what it meant, to the original audience, so that I can appropriately apply it to myself in the way that it was intended. And so I find it a key in my own personal life to break bondages off of me. I have to go deeper into my understanding of who I am in Christ, how Christ sees me, because that is what defines who I actually am as a person, not who I tried to create myself to be as I was growing up. Now you take that and apply it to an entire country, and that's where we see Germany at this point in time, where they've turned their back on, what they've seen in Catholicism, and said, we don't want that. They found, France and their mythologies and stuff as being too weak. They didn't like, England. And so they are trying to create for themselves who they want to be. And so they're going through as a society, as a nation, the same steps that many of us go through, individually as people, in trying to find their identity. And they're chasing after what sounds good, what tickles their ear, what sounds interesting, and trying to make that who they are. When the truth is, that's not who they were created to be. That's not why they were put on this earth. And they were actually just getting further and further and further away from what God had intended for them.
I appreciate your pastoral position in this. This is also interesting and brings another context to the whole supernatural story and the occult beginnings of Nazi Germany. It says, as head of the Munich esoteric group known as the Cosmic Circle, Alfred Schuller provided a bridge between Lagarde's Indo-Aryanism, Lance's occultism, and Langben's blood and soil philosophy. For Schuller, one's inner life force was equated with the strength of the blood, the mystical purity of which had supposedly degenerated through racial interbreeding. He believed that untamed Aryans with parapsychological and spiritualist powers might restore racial purity under the banner of the blood beacon and holy symbol of swastika. Schuller propagated a link between Gnosticism, specifically Manichaeism, the Cathar religious tradition, which were a Christian heretical sect in 14th century France, and the Ariosophic myths of Atlantis. All these themes, centered on the mystical power and sanctity of Aryan blood, were taken up by many Nazi thinkers in the 1920s and 1930s. Now, I was also surprised, not just that they went to so many Scandinavian gods, not just that Brothers Grimm and others paved the way with horror stories, but also that even before Nazi Germany started really becoming big and popular and important, that there were like all these fringe groups that were becoming more and more popular, where they were like discussing about Atlantis and other lost civilizations, and how Aryans, the blunt people, are actually those who are descending from them. And look, they moved to Iceland and Scandinavia and Germany, and we are descendants of them. We are the most powerful, most beautiful, most important race from all the peoples on the planet, and that's why we out to rule over them all. And I don't know. I'm like, okay, we cover a lot of these fringe and interesting theories on the podcast. We did hundreds of them, but we don't necessarily believe them. It's just fun, so we dissect them. But they actually believed in all these things. And occasionally in all these chapters, you'll see Eric, the author, saying how the real deal scientists, like secular scientists of Germany, they'll many times hesitate to make any comments on that, because they're like, we don't know how to make any scientific comment on Aryanism, or that do you think Jews are below or under like Germany, or about Atlantis, or about the occult, because this is not what science deals with. So you would see on one hand like real scientists and some thinkers who've been not like so much obsessed with the Nazi occultic symbolism. They'll be like, we're distancing from this. But they couldn't do anything, because eventually the whole nation started believing and wanting these things. And like we said, all of this was paving the way little by little. But I'm also thinking about, it's all about the blood. For them, it's like, oh, you don't have my blood. I have this blue blood. And we see this even nowadays, like, oh, I'm coming from the I don't know, genealogy of my so-and-so was like a duke or something cool, but like, so what? It's like, there's also some perversive and wicked way of how the enemy, let's call him Satan, he also wants people's blood. But in this case, I think there is some connection with the Bible and with Satanism, because if there's power in the blood, well, in the Nazi Germany and their wicked mindset, if spreading the Nazi Germany kingdom, quote unquote, required assassinating millions, tens of millions of people. 1 million people from 1 million people from my country were also killed. It wasn't just 6 million Jews. Everyone talks about them, but there are like so many gypsies, former Yugoslavian Serbs, Russians, so many Polish people. They're also annihilated by Germans. So I'm thinking there's something also that they're seeing about the blood, not just like, oh, our blood is better than other blood, but it's almost like there's this wicked, perverted power in the blood that helps them, like in a cultic way, in a satanic, wicked, twisted way, to like, we have to spill the blood so we can, spread the kingdom for our people, because our people are the promised people. Our people get this earth as the promised land. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, this is the inversion. This is the wicked way of the Garden of Eden and of the gospel and of God's kingdom. This is everything opposite. Any comment on that?
Yeah, it is interesting, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because it kind of blew my mind when I was reading this, and it was, more or less saying that there is a whole camp of thought that the Aryan race came from Atlantis, and that at some point they had all these mystical, like, superpowers, but then throughout the generations, because they had interbred and weren't of a pure bloodline, they had began to lose their powers. And so, since they were wanting to set themselves up as a country, like a superpower in the world, they needed to weed out all of the bad blood, and they were very, very actively looking for mediums that could talk to people. They were looking for parapsychology stuff like telekinesis and astral projection and all this kind of stuff, and they were looking for these people, and they were looking at their physical traits as well, and trying to decide if they had some vestiges in them of this ancient Atlantean master race, and that they were wanting to breed that and get back to, as close as they could, a pure bloodline, a clean bloodline that would then start to evolve these superpowers again, so that they could be the ruling dominant class in the world. And when I was reading about that, it blew my mind. And the fact that all of this started so far before Hitler, like Hitler was not the beginning of this. This was the psyche of the country coming into it 100 years before Hitler was ever on the scene. And so just the fact that there was all these different, groups of thought, and, all of them were performing different kinds of experiments or rituals or different things to try and practice and see who the more powerful was, or who could actually do this and who couldn't, and that they were listening that the governmental powers that were there at the time trying to run Germany were listening to these people. They're not listening to the real science and this stuff. The real scientists had to shut up for fear of, being persecuted. They're listening to the parapsychologists, and they're listening to the mediums who are saying that they're talking, to spirits from the great beyond. And they're listening to the astrologers that are looking, and interpreting the stars and all this kind of stuff. And they're letting that be the driving force behind how they were running their country and making their decisions. And it just, it boggles my mind to think that is what they thought was going to get them into a place of power, that if they did it right, that they were going to become a super master race that really called the shots on the entire earth. And I just, you can't just say, oh, wow, man, those people were crazy. I can't believe they thought that back then, because there's still people today that look at their horoscopes and that read the palms and make their decisions based on the tarot cards. And, there's still people who, seek angels and, all this kind of stuff to guide their daily lives. It's just that this was a time and a place in the world where it could have been like Ephesus back in the day of, biblical times, where they were so steeped in a culture of just paganism that they were allowing that to really run their country. And I don't think that, some of the countries today are really that far away from doing the same thing, just maybe in the name of different religions than what they were using, during the time of World War I and II.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Epistle of Ephesians and angels, because last night, every Saturday evening, I lead theology and Bible classes through our podcast. It's a close group of adult students. I have 5 of them. So every Saturday evening we gather. And last night we spent, oh my gosh, easily 30 minutes of exegeting Colossians 2. And one of the things that Paul warns in Colossians 2, it's about Judaizers and, coming with false humility and spiritualism. He also mentions that these people who try to impose, belittle, and condemn Gentile Christians who are like baby Christians by imposing all these things on them, he said that these false believers, Judaizers, that they were like worshiping even angels and receiving, visions and dreams from them. And it's interesting because what will be the difference between Colossians 2, between the book of Ephesians, between Mormonism, between how Mormonism became, how Islam became, and how Nazi Germany was influenced? We are talking in all of these instances about the fallen spiritual forces, fallen spiritual beings who are influencing people through visions, through dreams, through ecstatic feeling of happiness, revelation, secret knowledge. And how is that different from Genesis 6 and First Enoch, when Azazel and others came, Semyaza, and he was like, oh, here's demonic secret knowledge to you. It's just interesting. I wasn't even planning to mention this, but based on what you said in book of Ephesians, I'm like, yeah, it's all about the fallen ones, the hidden forces who influence people. And it's like, boom, let's hate others. Let's start wars. Let's bomb them because they're not like us. And because they're not like us, we have to hate them. We have to enslave them for the sake of birthing the Third Reich. I'm like, wow, there's so much occult. There's so much supernatural. There's so much demonic about the Third Reich, the Nazi Germany. It blew my mind off completely. It's more about that than politics. And because we're now speaking about demonic revelation to people, another subculture that was involved in Nazi Germany and paved the way for that even type of thinking was, surprise, surprise, theosophy. So I'll just read a paragraph about this. So theosophy, as we know, was invented by a Russian-German lady called Helena Blavatsky, who was deeply involved into the occult. And this happened in the late 19th century. She was, she went to India, Tibet. She founded the first Theosophical Society in New York City in 1875. And according to her occult theory of human evolution, which is called anthropogenesis, there were 7 root races. Beginning as a seed of cosmic energy, humanity had moved through different stages of evolution, including the Hyperborean. Isn't that where Conan is coming from, right? Yeah,
it might be.
No, in Conan Mythos, this is like either, if he's not coming from, but it's like that's I remember seeing the map as a younger person, because I love Conan stories. I'm like, Hyperborea, this is from Conan comics and movies. So including this area of Hyperborean, Lemurian, so she believed that Lemuria was literally this lost land and lost civilization, and Atlantean races, before reaching its current stage of mental and physical development. So again, beginning as a seed of cosmic energy, humanity had moved through different stages of evolution. As I mentioned, Lemurian, Atlantean, and Hyperborean races, before reaching its current stage of mental and physical development. Due to different branches of humanity retaining different traces of these original root races, modern humanity differed in its biological and spiritual faculties. The Aryan peoples enjoyed pride of place, except they had lost this putative faculty for magic still enjoyed by Oriental peoples. So they're like, Oriental people not so good because they stole our magic. So we, even though we're good, we forgot our magic. So we have to get back to where we were. One more sentence. This the invisible leaders of Mahatmas, of the Theosophic movement with whom Blavatsky communicated telepathically and received revelation and knowledge, were called the Great White Brotherhood. And this garbage was just one of many things that influenced Nazi Germany. Now, I can't believe that any sane people, you don't have to be a religious person, you don't have to be a scientific person. Why would you be in your sanity, if you're sane, why would you believe something like this and then, oh, we are better than them? I know people from my country, they think that we're such an ancient race and we're better than many, and because they hate us. Vatican hates us, Americans hate us, European nation hate us, because we are in such a good strategic place, and we are in a strategic place between different continents, and they hate us. It's like, but we are better. We are heavenly people. God especially loves us. So it's like, it's kind of similar seeing this in so many different cultures, ethnicities, races, like we are better than them. Who are them? I don't know, but I think it seems to be everyone else. So what is it about the Nazi Germany, Madame Blavatsky, and Theosophy that you would like to add when it comes to all this garbage about lost civilization and how Aryans are actually coming from them, and to them belong this, power of magic and the land and everything, and everyone else is, beneath them?
Yeah. So Blavatsky and the whole theosophical, movement, I think that there's a deep psychological need in people to feel special. And that's the only thing that I can think of that would explain why it caught on and spread so deeply throughout, lower Austria and down in through Germany. Because at its heart, at its core, it's just racism. And I think if you ask anybody on the surface, if racism is bad, they say, yeah, racism's bad. And I think that people back then, if you had approached them and just said, hey, everybody who's not like us, whose skin is a different color, whose hair is a different color, whose eyes are a different color, they're bad just because of that. I think people would have been like, well, I don't believe that. But all of a sudden, when you create this backstory for it, and yeah, you say that we had magic and we had power, and I've still got some of it. And you had mentioned Mormonism earlier, right? And so you compare her to like Joseph Smith, and she's like, yeah, I'm talking psychically, to even potentially extraterrestrial, type people and Atlantean spirits and different stuff that are telling me this, and Joseph Smith's like, oh, I've got an angel that only I can see and talk to, and I have to, view the tablets through the rock in the hat that only I can see and only I can read, and I've got the special revelation, and it's saying that we're right and they're wrong. And so you build this backstory up that makes us feel special, that I am special, that I inherently, because of who I am, deserve something greater than what I have. And these other people inherently, because of who they are, have stolen what I deserve. Therefore, I'm good, they're evil. And the fact that, all throughout the Grimm's fairy tales and stuff, they're viewing Jewish people as witches. It makes me think of like Roald Dahl and a lot of his books, that are very openly anti-Semitic. And how this mindset has just carried through. And I'm seeing it. Sorry, I'm getting a little off track here, but I see it so much all of a sudden in my Christian groups on Facebook today. is the actual nation of Israel, the one that carries the blessing from the Old Testament, or is it now the church? And this replacement theology stuff that I feel like is really starting to take hold with some people. And it's being bolstered by this idea of, we're right, they're wrong, and media coverage and opinion. And the most humbling and eye-opening thing I've read throughout this whole crisis over in the Middle East that's happening and has been for months now was somebody pointed out, regardless of whether you're for Palestine or for Israel or for Iran, whatever country you're for, there are Christians in every single country that are being persecuted and dying. And that's what we as Christians should be worried about. We should be praying for our brothers and sisters in Christ. We should be trying to get in to help and aid. We should be, supporting them, and not, which nation we think is correct. And so anyway, back to Blavatsky, she just fed people what they wanted to hear to make them feel special, and they ate it up, and it got so deep down into their cultural identity that for decades after she was around, her ideas and her theosophy kept popping up in the way that they did government, and in the way that they tried to rise to power, and what they would say on their platforms. And it wasn't just the Nazi Party, because the Nazi Party didn't come until way late. It was, I can't remember all the acronyms, the NDSP party, and the this 3-letter party and the this party. And they all more or less had the basic same platforms, that we're special and they're evil. And it was interesting, to see how it was kind of like the difference in Christian denominations. They might disagree on one point, and so they'd break off and create a whole other political party, but it all had kind of the same root idea that, 6 foot tall, blue-eyed, blonde people, we have the correct blood and everybody else is wrong. And it just, it still continues to blow my mind. Like, I've got a digital copy of the book up here, to try and follow along as we're talking. And I just keep rereading this stuff. And it just, it's like, I don't understand how they could believe this stuff, because on the surface, it's so obviously racist and wrong. But I think that in a more deceptive level, it makes them feel powerful. It makes them feel special. And so that's why, as a culture, they latched onto it so strongly.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And the last thing from chapter 1 is that there are so many other subcultures that influenced Nazi Germany. One of them was called Ariasophy. And in Ariasophy, the main guy was Guido von List. So he translated his work, and it was a fully fledged occult doctrine, which he called Ariosophy. And in his book, he laid a blueprint for many of the eugenical policies later adopted by the Third Reich. This included banning interracial marriages, selective breeding, and polygamy, and advocating the sterilization and elimination of inferior races from the mentally and physically inferior to the Jews. And the last thing that also, involved, sadly, got involved in Nazi Germany were the Borden sciences. And here we can hear about telepathy, parapsychology, something called world eyes theory, which I have to research more about it, because that's not so much mentioned in the book. But I'm just intrigued by the title, astrology, hand reading, mediums, and things of this sort. So all of these things eventually paved the way to Nazi Germany. So I hope that by now, we almost spent an hour, 50 something minutes. I hope that people are learning that it wasn't just politics and like some, racism and hatred towards anyone else born in a vacuum. No, this was happening for decades. So when Hitler came to the scene, he was like already welcome on the red carpet by the people, his own people, Germans, who were like, yeah, tell us more. We allow you to hypnotize us, so to speak. We allow you to deceive us. We allow you to tell us about this agenda because we want to believe actually this. And when you want to believe this, then that's saying that a lie repeated 100 or 1,000 times eventually becomes the truth. Anything political, religious, scientific, anything that is repeated so many times, any mantra, eventually it's like, oh yeah, I know about this, it's true. And now we're switching to chapter 2 that we won't spend that much time. It's about the Thule Society to the NSDAP, which is the political party that Hitler established and changed a lot, and that was eventually became the main political party in Nazi Germany post World War I. There's an interesting quotation by Rudolf von Sebotendorf in 1933. He said, "It was the Thule people to whom Hitler came in the very beginning. It was Thule people who first joined forces with Hitler." And from what I understood, Pastor Ben, Thule people were related to this Atlantis myths and all these myths about the Indo-Aryan races and blonde people evolving as superior race. So again, this is not a coincidence. These people came to Hitler as a backup, as a biggest support at the very beginning. Why didn't he reject them? Because he knew their propaganda. He knew their how they were seeing themselves as a superior race. But Hitler didn't reject them. He welcomed them, not just for political points, not just to make his party bigger and more influential in Germany, but because he shared the same occultic, ideological, spiritual, religious beliefs. Anything about the Thule Society and Hitler, if you would like to add?
Really just that it's brought up in chapter 2 and more in like chapter 3. The author mentions several times that mainstream history thinks of Hitler as being anti-religious, or common atheists think of him as a Christian, but that he was very anti-religious because of some of the things that he states in Mein Kampf. And there's one quote that comes up several times of his from Mein Kampf that people used to say, oh, well, he didn't believe in any of that stuff. But just like you pointed out, when you look at the Thule Society, when you look at all of these different, religious, if that's what you want to call them, people that he ended up making his inner circle, and establishing them as his right-hand man and as being the head of his SS and all of this kind of stuff, they are all very deeply rooted in this weird, quasi border scientific, pagan religious stuff. And so I think for people to say that, oh, well, Hitler didn't believe this, he was more of, he was just, more of an atheist, because I've heard that said a lot, that he was an atheist along with, Marxists and different stuff. He was an atheist. I don't think is correct. I think he was actually very, very religious, and that you can see it, like the proof is in the pudding. Look at the way, he put these people who were openly, deeply into this, mysticism around him, and you will begin to know what he actually did believe. And so, yeah, that's the only comment that I would have to make about that.
Okay, thank you. I just want to read one quotation. When it comes to what some of the occultists were saying, this is very interesting, and I would like to hear your comment. So occultists now characterize the war as, quote, cosmically necessary manifestation of processes playing out among the beings of the spirit worlds, world of demons and spirits, which works through humankind when nations battle one another, end quote. I'm like, what? No, seriously, I have to immediately go to the divine council worldview theology
Mhm.
and just think about all these spiritual entities, the fallen principalities, given as guardian spirits over the nations that eventually rebelled against God. And they're influencing all these peoples, all their political leaders with their science, with their occultic knowledge, with their myths, um, with their quasi sciences, all these border sciences, and everything else that falls in that category, including parapsychology, astrology, and other things. So these spiritual entities, these small g gods, are influencing Hitler and others to start waging wars. And it says here, it says, as these beings who are influencing them, they're beings of the spirit worlds, world of demons and spirits, which work through humankind when nations battle one another.
Mhm.
Wow. Well, thank you. So and so. It doesn't mention which occultist, but it says occultist as plural. They acknowledge that there were like spiritual powers happening here. They're like here at the scene because who is giving all this knowledge? Who is giving all this charisma? Who is giving all this excitement about starting a war? Because it's not a just war, it can be from God. It's like
Right.
it's like everything is here explained, but it just takes a long time to read. What would be your comment about gods of this fallen world, small g gods, small Elohim, influencing people in on any part of the planet? This is not just about
Mhm.
Germany, influencing them to hate others, to attack each other, to spill blood for the sake of like, we're better than you, we're coming to get you, even though you didn't do anything wrong to us, but just because you're not us.
Yeah. 100%. You hit the nail on the head. They acknowledge that the spiritual realm is alive and active, but they miss the cornerstone of it, that Yahweh exists and is real. He is creator of all and king of all. And so they are looking at their war as just and righteous because they believe, like every nation has believed since the Tower of Babel, that they were the right ones, because there is a territorial spirit assigned to them that is leading them, through these corrupt practices and war and bloodletting and genocide and experimentations and all this stuff, from Nephilim on down. And so they weren't wrong. It is a supernatural spiritual entities that are guiding this stuff, that were guiding these wars that they were involved in. They were wrong in that they thought that they were the right one. We know who the right one is. The right one is Almighty Creator, is Yahweh, is God of God, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, capital G God. And that's what they were missing. That's what they obviously, from their historical take on Catholicism, what they didn't get. And so that is what they were trying to establish through all this other stuff that they were into. Now, when you read that quote, if you took it out of context and you just quoted that, and we were having a conversation about not Nazi Germany, but let's say about America, let's say about Iran, let's say about something else, you can take that quote and apply it to, as far as I know, just about any country in the world today, and still see how powers and principalities are still in play and still in effect, and are still manipulating humans and pulling our strings to corrupt us and to get us to walk further and further and further away from God and his plan for us. And so I think that we have to be careful where we're at as a country. We've only been around for 250 some odd years as a country in America. We're not old, but history repeats itself. And I'm afraid that this uproar, that is being stoked in America right now, is leading people down the wrong path. And again, thinking that they're doing it out of righteousness, when maybe that's not really the Spirit of God that is stoking that fire.
Thank you for that comment. We're gonna stay just for I don't know, maybe next 10 minutes in chapter 2, and then we'll switch to my favorite chapter 3. Not because it's good, but because it's insane. So let's talk shortly about the supernatural thinking in the early Nazi party, which is still part of chapter 2. I'll just read a paragraph. There was this guy called Dietrich Eckart, and he was one of the most important early influences on Hitler and a model for future Nazi leaders. In his periodical, which I won't try to read, Eckart combined a keen intellect and pragmatic approach to politics with a genuine enthusiasm for Nordic folklore and the mystical roots of Germanic religion. In articles such as The Midgard Serpent and Jewry, well, I can't, this is like, it has something called Jewry über alles, whatever that means in German. Eckart propagated Ariosophic principles and fantastical theories about the blood-sucking caste or layer of society of Jewish wire pullers, with Hitler as both his muse and acolyte. Eckart was a strong believer in the power of religion and mythology as an ideological tool. In early conversations with Hitler, he frequently invoked the Manichaean dualistic role of good and evil, God and the Jewish devil, a quasi-Christian, quasi-pagan Gnosticism typical of Ariosophy and later Nazi approaches to religion. Eckart argued that the racially superior Indo-European people had been corrupted by the Jewish desert spirit embedded in mainstream Christianity. So they were not pro-Christ, they were not pro-Bible. They were like, writing these articles that will involve the name Midgard Serpent. They would see this, they would, spread these fantastical theories about the blood-sucking caste, C-A-S-T-E, of course, where Jews would belong and others, such as my people, because we're not worthy enough of them, right? And when he was dialoguing, Eckart, with Hitler, and he invoked this imagery and these words and symbols that are also part of the Bible, Hitler didn't oppose him. Hitler was okay with this. And later, this was becoming more and more part of the Nazi movement. Would it be fair, Pastor Ben, to say that Nazi politics and Nazi movement was not just political? This was deeply Nazi religious movement. Politics was part of it, but it seems to me that politics was just used to hypnotize people and propel them to use weapons. It was just like to play with people, to put them in a sort of a trance, and they're like, yes, master, and just make them what they want to do. But it was actually this movement of the occult and spiritism that pushed them, where, of course, racism came, politics came, but it was this just messed up spiritual belief that, of course, came after Abel and Cain, and came after the falling out of God's grace after the Garden of Eden, and it came after the Tower of Babel, which you mentioned a while ago. It has to deal with things of that sort, where like Hitler is like fine with these articles, he's fine with these terms, he's fine with these gods, he's fine with the Bible being twisted, he's fine with God's people, at least God's people being called God's people in the Old Testament. He's fine if they're if there are derogatory terms used against them. He's fine about them because he's like, because his mind was somewhere else. So when our friends atheists want to say that he was a Catholic Christian, none of not only Hitler, but none of his closest associates were ever Christians, ever. Maybe only if they went as kids and teenagers with their parents in the church, if they were even then believers. But everything about him and his associates is deeply yelling to me and to everyone who is reading this. It's like it was a big combo of all these fringe, supernatural, occult theories, behaviors, thinking, and religions mixed up and meshed in all this quasi whatever you want to call it. But it's way closer to Luciferianism than biblical Christianity. So when people say that it was the church or Christianity, no, they're running away from Christian movements. So it's like,
Mhm.
for you as a pastor, what would be your warning sent to people who may, even nowadays, they can go too far left, too far right in any country, not just in the States, not just in Germany? What would be your pastoral message? Like, chill, and also don't put your trust in political leaders. It's like, put your trust in God and never become too much radical left or on the right. Be radical for God, if I can use that term. What would be your comforting or warning message to them?
Yeah, I mean, really, you hit the nail on the head. If you're going to go extreme for Jesus. Anything else is not of God. We have moved beyond the place of, I feel like, of God raising up people like David or Moses or Noah, because all of those patriarchs were just foreshadowing Jesus. Jesus has come, he lived, he died, he is arisen and alive with God at his right hand now. And so we need to focus on Jesus. We don't need to put our faith and our trust behind a political system, behind a government, behind a nation. Because when we do that, when we become nationalistic, when we get to the point where we're worshiping our flag more than we're worshiping our God, then our allegiance is not where it should be. God should always come first, allegiance to Jesus first. And it's easy in America, especially, it is easy to say, I'm an American, therefore I'm a Christian. Because since World War II and throughout the Cold War, it has been, intentionally put out there that Christianity equals America. And so today in America, people are losing sight of the Christianity. They're losing sight of Jesus, and they're replacing it with the president, and they're replacing it with the flag. And they think that whatever war we as a country decide to, start or get involved in, that it must be righteous, because we've been indoctrinated that in God we trust. Therefore, if we're putting our trust in our money system, if we're putting our trust in our government, blah, 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 that we must be right, because that has to be what God wants us to do. And the warning is for us as individuals, anybody listening to this, make sure your allegiance is with Christ. Christ first. And let that lead and guide you in your decisions, whether it's something that you're going to vote for or something that you're going to purchase. Let Christ lead you. Don't let the talking heads on the news lead you. Don't let the YouTubers and the bloggers and these type people lead you. Good Lord, don't let Hollywood stars lead you. Let Christ lead you, because anything else is just, it's going to lead you astray. And I think that if we as individuals make sure our allegiance is to Jesus, then we will see the transformation in the country that we want. And it won't be led by politics. It will be led by the heart. And I think that's where we get off track.
Okay, thank you for the warning that regardless of who you vote for, not to get extreme and not to get too radical, because then you can lose Christ and become ideologists, maybe not in the same way as Nazi Germans did, because they were all involved in the occult and secret knowledge, but in a way you can also abandon the path of Christ. I also want to read one more paragraph. It's very cool. One of the early Nazi leaders, such as Hitler, Himmler, and Rosenberg, they very often refer to monsters, and by monsters they meant demons, devils, vampires, mummies, and other supernatural tropes in articulating their views. In criticizing communism, for example, Hitler declares that the original founders of this plague of nations must have been veritable devils, for only within the brain of a monster, not that of a man, could the plan of an organization assume form and meaning. He also said, one cannot drive out the devil with Beelzebul. And like, dude, are you quoting Christ? You don't even care about Jesus. So he was talking, he was quoting Jesus from the Gospels when he said, one cannot drive out the devil with Beelzebub. He was talking about fighting Jews and communists, where this meant developing a hostile attitude toward the Soviet Union and avoiding their political meetings as the devils avoid holy water. And of course, in all of these things and all of this political propaganda and mumbo jumbo symbolism, Hitler was talking about the Jews and saw them as demons and vampires. And of course, vampires, of course, demons, we know about demons, but most of the vampire stories were presenting vampires as evil ones, and then there had to be someone brave, a sort of a knight who would come and rescue the poor villagers, or a king whose daughter got maybe turned into a vampire, or she disappeared. They're trying to find them. So here comes a blonde hair, a man, a knight of a sort, who is coming to rescue the kingdom or a poor family, poor village from a vampire. And they're seeing Jews and other nationalities and races as sort of a vampire, like, no, Nordic people, German people, we are the knights in stories. We're these good guys. And the vampires, the demons, the zombies, that's the gypsies, that's the Jews, that's the Slavic people, that's the African people, those are the Mongols, all these races underneath us. So again, everything from beginning to the end in Hitler's life, not just political involvement, but even before that, was like a huge combo of this mysticism, ancient religions, racism, mythical stories, fantasy stories, with some form of like, I can't help, and I will say this, I can't help myself but to think like he was and we'll turn now very soon to the third chapter that speaks about this. He was a prophet of those times. He was a demonically influenced prophet whose job was, as he was deceived, to deceive others and lead them into war where millions of people will be slaughtered just because they're not Germans. So yeah, buy the book. We're going to skip a lot when it comes to the second chapter. There's very interesting subchapter called Hitler's Supernatural Imagery. Let me see if I can maybe read something about this. I mean, from this subchapter, there's so many cool things, but we simply don't have time because we also have to dissect whatever we're reading, and time is going so fast. Yeah, I'm going to skip this, and we're going to switch to the third chapter. That was my favorite, at least the first half of the third chapter, and that one is called Exploiting Hitler's Magic. Let me see. Okay, the first subchapter, the occult public and Hitler's magic. It talks about this guy Ernst Schertl, who was one of Germany's most prominent esotericists. He was talking about, for example, given his background, it is perhaps surprising to learn that Hitler had a copy of Schertl's book called Magic in his own library. The promotion of gay rights, sadomasochism, the world music, and other areas we tend not to associate with Hitler, yet Hitler had in his library, and he was reading them. Yet Schertl's occult proclivities and scandalous public persona hardly discouraged Hitler from reading and even underlining this book titled Magic thoroughly, including thick pencil lines next to passages such as the following line, quotation, "He who does not carry demonic seeds within him will never give birth to a new world." I'm like, it's becoming more interesting. It's becoming worse, but more interesting. And I don't know why none of these World War II movies, none of the World War even I movies, they talk about occultic, teachings and propaganda that was happening for decades. They all talk about, racism and war, politics, but none of the movies, I've never seen a movie that talks about these things. How can you omit such an important quotation? Again, Hitler adopted Ernst Schertl's quotation from his book Magic, he adopted this quotation: "He who does not carry demonic seeds within him will never give birth to a new world." I mean, it's like, what? It's like, it's you're being satanic spawn, here being brainwashed and turned into the disciple of Satan. And as Jesus would send us to a Great Commission, this is the inverse propagated demonic version of the Great Commission. You're now serving the Great Cthulhu. Let's just use that word metaphorically. And now you, as a follower, as a devotee of Cthulhu, you know, this demonic entity or entities that were like influencing Hitler and others, well, now you go and spread our messed up type, type of a gospel, quote unquote. I mean, this is what it is. The same tools that the Jews and Christians use in the Bible, the enemy wants to use in a perverted way. Go and spread our Nazi gospel. As Jesus made disciples, now Hitler and his fellows, they're going to make disciples. What would be your comment on the occult public and Hitler's magic in this third chapter? What would be your thoughts?
It is interesting because when we look at Schertl, when we look at Blavatsky, when we look at some of these people and see what it was that influenced them and what they stood for, knowing that these are people that are influencing Hitler. Blavatsky was very much into like being a vegetarian and animal rights and this kind of stuff. Schertl here, had some of his titles and chapters and stuff in his books, were about eroticism and flagellation, and were very pro homosexual things. And so it's interesting to know that these kind of thoughts and these paradigms that these people had were funneling into Hitler, and that these are the kinds of things that were influencing him to do and to believe what he thought, promoting gay rights, sadomasochism, this kind of stuff. And it just like, it blows my mind, because all I ever learned about Hitler, you watch some of his black and white movies, and the Heil Hitler sign that they give and the funny mustache, and nobody ever answers the question, how could this one man lead so many people to do so much evil? How could this one man, convince all of these people, the nation of Germany, to go and to murder millions upon millions of other human beings? And history doesn't teach how he could have done that. This book really sheds light on it, especially as we're getting into chapter 3 here, because we're finally starting to understand why and how he was so charismatic, why and how he, is able to, cast his spell on so many people. And so, yeah, these people are feeding into him these thoughts and these ideas and these world philosophies, and it is all making up who he is, as a human being. And I think Hitler was, yes, probably very, very, very gifted as a public speaker. I think, yes, he was very charismatic. And I've said for years and years and years that I think those were probably gifts that were given to him by God. But because of the influence he had and the choices that he made to turn his back on that God, instead of seeking after the Christian God and seeking after all this other stuff in his life, he used his God-given gifts for evil. And now, as we talk more about this, we'll see how and why he was able to do that.
Pastor Ben, imagine if Hitler never went this route, and if he actually became a Christian, the charisma he had, the knowledge, the intellect, and curiosity for knowledge. Imagine if he actually used it for good as an evangelist, as a street preacher, as a preacher in the church, as an academic, in academia, writing theological papers, using that for good. And God could have blessed him and anointed him. Here he got anointed, but through the dark side. And it's like such a sad story. Honestly, it's such a sad story. And this chapter 3, when I was reading it, I was honestly thinking about the cult of Cthulhu, where this cosmic entity chooses you, anoints you, so to speak, quasi anoints you. And then you're given this knowledge and this revelation, which is, of course, false and fallen. And you think you're doing something good, you think you're serving a proper master, and you go in the world spreading this agenda, this propaganda, this dogma. And I don't know. I just kept thinking about Cthulhu, and in chapter 3, several pages into the 3rd chapter, we come into the subchapter called Hitler's Magic. But there is just a small paragraph above that one that I want to read. Let me see. Yes. For Schertl and practicing parapsychologists, recovering this unconscious allowed one to tap into the long-lost paranormal powers, magic, akin to those that Blavatsky, Steiner, and Lanz claimed were lost when ancient Aryans mated with lesser races. Occultism offered a way of channeling primordial magic, the mana, like we see in video games, or demonic power that dwelt natural in both animals and humans. Magicians, or shapers of mana, Schertl admitted, possessed traits that might be considered as psychopathic under normal circumstances, but they also had very strong characters and leadership capabilities, which is why the magician, capital M, is in all earlier times identical with ruler. And this is giving like a fine introduction to why Hitler was quote unquote special in a way when it comes to the occult and when it comes to being anointed by these dark lords of the other side, let's call them that way, because it wasn't God and his angels. So again, here we see the occult and magic tightly connected. We see these magicians that were called those who were wielding ability to shape mana. And they were considered maybe by regular people as psychopathic, but no. These were the people with strong charisma, strong character, and leadership capabilities. And this is why these people who would be wielding with mana or with magic, they'll be called capital M magicians and also rulers. So like they're giving a different kind of, I won't say necessarily a definition, but explanation of what a magician would be. So when I was reading this section of chapter 3, I was like, basically and literally, Hitler was a wizard. And it's like, I mean, forget Harry Potter, right? Forget that. Think about any dark wizard. Think about any of your favorite comic, movie, TV show, video game, or just think about it for a second in your mind. Think about any prophet / wizard / magician that will be accumulating all these demonic ideas and powers and knowledge and use it to enslave others. That's who Hitler was. He wasn't primarily a politician. That was another asset under his belt. He was using politics to gain influence, but he was not first and foremost politician. And then it says, no wonder that Hitler apparently read this from Schertl. And again, this is part of his book called Magic. In his reading of Schertl, Hitler seized immediately on one of the central tenets of parapsychology, the power of the will in appealing to the collective unconscious. The magician did not seek to support did not seek the support of a people whose good he would have to serve. No. Magician did the opposite. He was seeking to garner power. So not to help people, not to serve people, but actually to subdue them and to use them for his gains. So it's like, so we're getting now clearer and clearer definition of who the magician was in their mind, right? Practicing magic required getting in touch with what the modern man considered irrational by invoking one's intuition, which facilitates a divinization of the body. This hallucinatory suggestive process was fostered in ancient times through gods and concrete ceremonies. A whole cult with its temples and underground vaults, his idols, his sacred groves, gardens, lakes, and mountains, his whole magic pomp and solemn ritual. Hitler generated the same energies by shifting his venue from Munich beer halls to massive rallies, ceremonies, and parades. Chapter 3 is phenomenal. It's like reading a combo of Harry Potter, Cult of Cthulhu, and whatever you want to think. Maybe even, whatever you like or dislike, but in a way you can't stop reading because it's so fascinating and it teaches you not to turn to that dark side. So I'm even going a little bit into the Star Wars. So Pastor Ben, Hitler was everything except uneducated, stupid, illiterate. He was spending time devouring books by all these occultists, racist, political, religious, occultic leaders and authors that were writing books throughout decades and centuries. He had a vast library that was discovered after his death, right? And so many books were found in the library. This was one of the books. So Hitler was a modern day, speaking of the 20s and 30s of the last century of the Nazi Germany. He was a modern day prophet, a modern day magician, a modern day wizard who was harnessing powers from these cosmic powers. That's why I think about the Cult of Cthulhu. And he was using, when he was speaking to people, to mesmerize them. They were like, yes, master, tell us more. And they're like, other people who were like not involved in this movement, they're like, yeah, it's a fine speech, but nothing like to go crazy about. It's almost like not in the same way, but like people were like fascinating about Beatles. Beatles are coming. Oh, if I would just touch Beatles, women are screaming. They're like tearing their skin. They're crying. They're like, I can't believe I touch or I saw one of the, the whole Beatles or one of them. I'm like, and for me, I'm like, who cares? They're just people. They're just Beatles. Like I know a couple of songs, which is not the point, but it's like, that was that hysteria that was like, bringing people who were in love with not so much Hitler, yes, him, but also his propaganda, his occultic political teachings. So like people like, wow, tell us more. They're like asking for more because they're being seduced and hypnotized by his rhetoric. Because again, he was a very gifted speaker. What do you think about all of this when it comes about rituals, when it comes about modern day definition of a magician, about these cults and temples, and how back in the days they would meet in beer halls, but now because Hitler was gaining power and influence and reputation, now he would fill the whole public rallies and ceremonies and parades, and people come in masses to listen to him.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. Like I said, for how he was able to do what he did, it is polarizing the conversations that people are having in beer halls and coffee shops and this kind of stuff. The interest of the nation as a whole, it's polarizing everyone, and it's now giving them focus. As his influence is growing, it's getting more people to turn to him and look to him to be the authority on what they should and shouldn't do. And when you were reading the quote, and it talks about it's giving the quote, a whole cult with its temples and underground vaults, his idols, his sacred groves. I just kind of laughingly in my head, when you read that, his sacred groves, I kind of was like, oh yeah, his Bohemian Grove. Because, it's like these same kinds of things still exist and are at work today. And yeah, I think that he was partially learning psychology and how to appeal to the masses and tell them what they want to hear. And that it was also partially spiritual in that he was charismatic and being able to tell them what to think and have them believe it. He said what they wanted to hear enough that they put their trust in him, and then it allowed him to then indoctrinate them with his specific ideas and, you know, brand of worldview to get them to go along with him. And that is, by this definition, I mean, that is the magician, that is the wizard, shaping, you know, people's minds and their thoughts, and grabbing the unseen forces and powers around you and putting it forth via your will and what you're saying. So yeah, I think it explains quite a bit.
Okay, thank you. We skipped a lot from chapter 1 and 2 and even beginning of chapter 3, but these following few pages I have to read a lot because it's so good, and then we'll be done with the episode. Those capable of manipulating the masses tended to be mentally abnormal, neurotic, combative, and charismatic, all traits generally ascribed to Hitler. Knowledge must once again take on the characteristics of a secret science. A new age of magic interpretation of the world is coming. Hitler was reasoning about all of this, which would focus on the will and not intelligence. Numerous witnesses compared Hitler to a medium, magician, or medicine man who could, in the words of the Nazi party leader Robert Ley, manipulate mystical forces which humans cannot avoid. In 1924, the astrologer Elsbeth Ebertin observed that Hitler is only in his element when he has a crowd in front of him. On the platform, he's more like a medium, the unconscious tool of higher powers. German policy was not made, Jung suggested, the famous psychiatrist, but revealed through Hitler. So Germany policy was not made, but revealed through Hitler. He is the mouthpiece of the gods as of old. Another Cult of Cthulhu reference. Critics and supporters alike felt the same magical power in Hitler's presence. In Hitler's company, another gentleman recalls, he said, "I have again and again come under a spell which I was only later able to shake off, a sort of hypnosis." Another gentleman called Otto Strasser described Hitler as a clairvoyant who went into a trance when face to face with his public. That is the moment of real greatness, Strasser explained. Carried away by a mystic force, he cannot doubt the genuineness of his mission. Like any shaman or magician, the spoken word was essential to Hitler's magic. But it was not the rhetorical or political content of his speeches that mattered. Hitler's speeches were probably the greatest example of mass sorcery that the world has heard in modern times, Haydn, another gentleman, observed. Hitler believed, like a magician, delivering an incantation that repeating the same message over and over again would make it become reality. Hitler was not a conventional politician or statesman, but a prophet regularly in a state of narcissistic conviction, which he attributes to his call to the salvation of his supporters. So he also had this messiah complex. For the left wing of the Weimar government, for many liberals, for the most foreign observers, the content of Hitler's speeches, his words, his gesticulations were laughable. Why did Hitler, whom most Germans seem to worship, produce next to no impression on any foreigner? Jung asked rhetorically. It is because Hitler is the mirror of every German's unconscious, while he mirrors nothing from a non-German. There is such a force as the collective unconscious of a nation, Jung, in a psychological way, continued. In observing Hitler dozens of times, Haydn was less fascinated by Hitler than his audience. No matter how ridiculous his statements, Haydn recalled, the listeners sat rooted into their chairs with a blissful expression that had no connection whatever with the theme of the speech, but reflected instead the deep beatitude of a thoroughly muddled soul. Hitler was able to hear a voice, Young added, which represented the collective unconscious of his own race. He is virtually the nation. His power was not political, it is magic. By translating the religious mysteries of Nazism for the German people, Hitler became the master enchanter and the high priest, the nation's supreme magician. According to many converts, Hitler's attraction seemed almost supernatural. As one witness reports, after hearing Hitler for the first time, instantly I came to a decision and I said to myself that only this party can save Germany. Hitler's speech drew me to his party NSDAP, so to speak, with magical power. Even General Ludendorff, a man who had commanded millions of soldiers, trembled with emotion when he first heard Hitler. And I'll stop here. These several pages were like so good because here Hitler, I imagine like, what is that? I forgot. I'm so bad with names. In the last Star Wars movie, when that lady, the Jedi lady, is fighting that dark sorcerer, what is his name? I forgot.
Oh my gosh. It's Palpatine, but he's Darth Sidious.
Okay, so I imagine Hitler in a way, of course, without those, magical electrical abilities to send him. But that's how I imagine Hitler, like in the Star Wars. He was not Darth Vader. He was way more powerful. Darth Vader will be one of his generals, let's say, but he was like the main bad like sorcerers behind the scenes that will like orchestrate everything. So it will take equally good Jedi or a knight or fighter to come and kill him. So that's how I was imagining. I went from the cult of Cthulhu and being a priest of Cthulhu to like the Star Wars and one of those like the main bad guy in the Star Wars mythos. It's like he was a prophet, he was a magician, he had power in his words in almost a magical way to seduce the masses. And they were like, oh yeah, whatever Hitler says, it goes. It's like people couldn't stop listening to him. Even that general whose last name starts with L, he went to so many battles. He was leading millions, and he was trembling in Hitler's presence. And it's not necessarily the words that he was using because they're so eloquent. Because people from other parties and foreigners are like, what is special about this guy? He's smart, but he's not that eloquent. His hand gesticulations are like funny. Like, what do you find interesting about this guy? But people are like, yes, sir, yes, master. What is your what would you add that you didn't mention earlier when it comes to Hitler's so-called magical powers?
Yeah, I think a psychologist would probably call it like mass hypnotism. But it is definitely he had a way of drawing people in to his charisma, into his, magical term would be like his glamour, right? That would make them see and feel what he wanted them to see and feel. The quote from that one man, said, I heard, Hitler speaking and I thought I have to join his party. It's the only hope for Germany. I mean, to have, a human being who desires and hopes for his nation, right? That already existed in him, but he doesn't know what the answer is. And then for Hitler to be able to speak and to draw people in and for them to say, yes, that's it. That's what we want. I think there is absolutely something manipulative and evil and, even abusive about that. On a minor scale, you see it in narcissism, with narcissists and stuff and how they can do that to the individuals. The fact that people who were there and, would be on the stage with him and say that he would go into almost like a trance-like state as he was speaking. um, it's more like he was preaching. It's not like he was, giving a debate, or like he was delivering, a prepared speech. He was preaching, and he was the mouthpiece of the little g, gods that were speaking through him, and it was drawing the people in. And it is possible because the hole that was inside their hearts and their psyches was created by those same little g gods. And so they knew what to say through this man to draw in the masses, and to say, yeah, he's the one I'm going to follow. In fact, I'm going to take any kind of morals, any kind of idea of right and wrong, and I'm just going to set him aside, because this guy is my Messiah. He's my savior, and I'm just going to do whatever he says. And so, yeah, there's absolutely a diabolical spiritual, aspect to what's happening here.
Okay, we'll be done in several minutes. Few more quotations and I'll be done. One of the also leaders in Nazi Germany said that to be German is a phenomenon that cannot be explained rationally. And it was the guy with last name Wessel. He said this to American Associate, echoing Thomas Mann's quote that the German soul possesses something profound and irrational, an element of the demonic and heroic. So it wasn't just Hitler, it was like people around him, so many political leaders, so many war leaders, so many, let's call them philosophers, not everyone, but also there were some who becoming more and more into the same, they would adopt same type of this irrational belief that would be a combo: philosophical, spiritual, mythical, religious, occultic type of thinking. So it's like for them, oh, you're from America, oh, you can't understand. To be German is so special because we are so special. There's something so profound and divine about our soul, but you, poor Polish person, poor Indonesian person, poor Australian person, poor Nigerian person, you can't understand this because you're not us. A couple more things. The main astrological journal back in those days, in 30s, called Zenith, regularly produced favorable horoscopes of Hitler, referring back to Ebertin's now famous 1923 and 1924 predictions as omens of Hitler's success. Adolf Hitler makes the plan according to one April 1931 horoscope because he thinks more consciously in a cosmic fashion than many other German politicians. He has a heart in his breast that feels the interrelationship with the cosmos more distinctly than speculative sophists. The horoscope continued. This horoscope, these astrologers sound way more philosophical than just observing stars. He said that Hitler possessed heroism and willingness to suffer. He needs to remain a fighter in order to make his claim, just like Mussolini in Italy. And last citation for tonight, in 1923, Hitler himself prophesied a new order. He would create a 1,000-year Reich fueled by the spiritual energy which a people is capable of putting forth. Hitler said, anyone who supports me in a battle would become a fellow fighter for a unique spiritual, I would say almost divine creation. So I can't wait for the continuation of this book. Again, we just covered 1/3, going to the first 3 chapters. Chapters are really long, letters are so small. The whole book has 9 chapters. We'll do probably 2 more episodes eventually. But Pastor Ben, this chapter 3 was so eye-opening. I mean, everything we read and talked about tonight was so eye-opening about the occultic, supernatural background of not just Hitler's Nazi Germany, but everything that was happening by the end of the 18th century through Brothers Grimm, through Aryan, Indian, mythology, through the supposed lost continents of Lemuria and Atlantis, through evolved races such as Nazi German, not Nazi Germans, but like people who would settle, Nordic people in Scandinavia and in Iceland, to all of this I don't know how to call them, just brainwashing, and not only political, but political, mythical, religious, spiritual ideology. Of it's like, I'm receiving a message, in this context Hitler, and I'm going to use it to subdue the masses, hypnotize them, and lead them into the war, where like we're establishing our kingdom, very opposed and different than God's kingdom, where millions will die and suffer because we are better than them. And this was so diabolical that even his followers, they accredited him to be a prophet, to be a magician, to be able to receive from the cosmos and from the cosmic forces, receive that, in a way, be anointed, I'm paraphrasing, and deliver the message and kind of seduce them. They're like, yes, give us power, give us the plan, we'll march for you, we'll die for you, we'll do whatever you want. They're like, just like you see in some horror movies, people being possessed, and they don't have any ability to move or ability to think for themselves, because they're so taken by this spirit, demonic spirit. But that's because they opened the door to this. So by saying this, this will be the end of this podcast. I'm glad we made it before 2 hours, because I thought we'll go way longer. We skipped so many things, unfortunately. Buy this book for yourself. It's a really good scholarly book, published by Yale University. I don't know what is the cost. I bought it a year or two ago. It's a scholarly, very good book. And again, we just covered 1/3 for tonight. Pastor Ben, what would be your concluding thoughts? And please tell us, is there any website or podcast of yours? I know that you used to have one. I don't know if you still have time to work on it. Pastor Ben's thoughts. Tell us something about that, and tell us your concluding thoughts of this 3rd chapter, please.
Yeah, so concluding thoughts. By the time we wrap up with the 3rd chapter here, I can start to understand why people have said that Hitler very much could have been one of the antichrists. You know, the word says that there are multiple antichrists, the spirit of the antichrist, because so much of what he does is a perversion and a knockoff of what God has done and has, worked towards accomplishing on earth. I can see him very much as being a false Messiah for his people. And I think that as we move forward and carry on with the book, it's going to, reinforce that more and more. If anybody has any interest whatsoever in learning about, the supernatural, or learning about Nazis or Hitler in particular, I 100% recommend this book. I also found it at the local library. I've got a digital copy of it that I've been reading. And so it is absolutely fascinating. You can find me on Facebook at Pastor Ben's Thoughts, YouTube. I've been going live there and covering some of my sermons that I've been doing on the YouTube, Pastor Ben's Thoughts. And anybody is welcome to shoot me a message, drop me a line if you have any questions about this or anything else that we've been covering. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for your wisdom and for your time and patience with this book and with me, Pastor Ben. I would also invite everyone to subscribe to Pastor Ben's channel and send him an encouraging, comforting, uplifting message. Also pray for your pastors. If you are a Christian and watching this either live or in days and weeks to come, pray for your pastors and priests, because there are people just like us who go through so many trials, challenges. People betray them. People speak lies about them. People expect so many crazy things about them, including that they're morally and spiritually perfect. Pastors, I was reading statistics, they go through depression, they go through isolation, they think that many people are not really their friends, but they just use them. Pastors are many times available 24/7. They're underpaid, underappreciated, and things of that sort. So hug your pastor, love your pastor, pray for your pastor, and even if you disagree, don't be a jerk. Tell them in a nice way. Don't put them down. Many pastors are trying with almost minimum wages to feed their families and raise kids, and there's like such a huge pressure on them. So pray for your priests, pray for your pastors, and again, if you're Eastern Orthodox, happy Easter, and we shall see you this coming Friday when Sean and I, should cover the topic of ayahuasca. We'll be covering one book. We'll be covering one documentary and maybe a couple of chapters. Not chapters, couple of articles if we have time, and we'll see who will be the next Sunday's guest. I'm talking with a former oh my gosh, what is the word? A Druid who turned to Christ and trying to see if he would be willing to come on the podcast. I don't know when, and he will be willing to talk about his life as a Druid and what is the difference between that and serving Christ. So that's open. I would like to see him come, but also we'll see. So happy Easter. God bless you. God bless you, Pastor Ben, your family, your work, your ministry, and everything. And we'll see you in a sequel of this book. That being said, God bless you all and see you soon. Take care.